The gillyweed sat in Harry's palm like something dredged from a drain pipe. Dobby had placed it there 4 minutes ago, materializing from nowhere in the equipment room beside the Hogwarts changing rooms, while Harry stood with his shoes still unlaced and his heart somewhere in the vicinity of his throat. The elf had said, in the urgent, guilty tone of someone who had just stolen from a very dangerous person's personal stores, that Harry needed to eat it. All of it. Right now. Dobby's enormous eyes had been bright with a terror that was not, Harry noticed, directed at him. Harry looked at the gillyweed. He ate it. The transformation arrived without warning, the way the best and worst things in his life tended to, all at once and too late to brace for. His throat closed, his chest convulsed. For 3 seconds he was certain he was dying, and then his feet were carrying him out of the room and down the bank and into the Black Lake before he'd decided to go, and the water swallowed him whole, and his gills opened, and he breathed. The world went cold and green and enormous. The shore's noise cut away to nothing. Above him, through the silver ceiling of the surface, he could still see the smeared shapes of the crowd. Hundreds of people who would never know what the inside of the Black Lake actually looked like, who probably imagined something picturesque. It was not picturesque. It was vast and dark and indifferent, and Harry had approximately 1 hour before the gillyweed gave out, and it became lethal. He checked his grip on his wand and swam. The Grindylows came early. They materialized from the weed-choked periphery in the way things with too many fingers tended to, from several directions at once, their brittle horns catching the faint light filtering down from above. Harry had read about Grindylows. Knowing what they were did not make the sensation of their fingers closing around his ankle any less alarming. He twisted, got his wand arm free, and cast Relatio. The spell shuddered through the water and scattered them in a thrash of pale limbs, and he kept moving. The Merpeople settlement announced itself through sound before sight, a resonance that was harsh from above water, but resolved, down here, into something almost musical, though nothing he could have reproduced. He descended through a field of swaying lake weeds and found the colony below. Figures with grey skin and dark green hair drifting loose in the current, watching him from yellow eyes set in faces with too many sharp angles. They wore necklaces of pebbles and fish bones. Several held spears. They watched him pass. The 4 hostages were bound to a stone column at the settlement center, roped by weed, and they were all terrifyingly still. Harry's chest clenched before he reminded himself of what Hermione had explained, that the Merpeople had agreed to hold the hostages safely, that the enchanted sleep was not drowning, that they would be fine. He needed to believe that. He believed it. He recognized Ron first. The red hair was distinctive even here, even fanned out in the dark water. Then Hermione, her bushy brown curls arranged around her face in a way that managed to look almost deliberate. Then a girl he recognized from the corridors, the Hufflepuff champion's girlfriend, dark-haired, her expression in sleep more peaceful than Harry had ever seen it in waking. And then, at the end of the column, Gabrielle. He recognized her by the hair. He had not met Gabrielle Delacour before this moment, but he had seen Fleur nearly every day since October, and the girl tied at the column's end was a replica of Fleur built to a child's scale. The same silver-blonde hair floating free and slow in the current, the same particular quality to her face that, even unconscious and bound and 8 years old, arranged itself into something that seemed deliberate. She was a child. She was Fleur's face. Harry cut Ron free and held him up. He looked toward the surface. He counted what he could feel. The ache behind his gills, the early signal of the gillyweed's hour closing. He waited. The merpeople watched. He waited. The settlement was silent in the way of things that have decided to outlast whoever is standing in them. 1 minute became 2. Fleur was not coming. Harry had suspected it since the Grindylows. Whatever had sent her down, the Grindylows had ended before she'd gotten past them. He looked at Gabrielle. He looked at his wand. He cut her free. Getting 3 people to the surface on 1 set of gills and a depleting gillyweed was not graceful. It was slow and effortful, and twice he nearly lost Gabrielle to the sideways pull of the current. He held Ron's wrist with 1 hand, towed Gabrielle with the other arm, and swam upward through the cold and the dark and the silence, and the silver ceiling cracked open and became February air, and the air was loud. He surfaced last. He registered this abstractly, the way you register information that doesn't change what you already did. The crowd's noise hit him in a single wave. His gills were already beginning to close. He could feel his throat remembering how to work the normal way. On the bank, Fleur was running. She had been standing very still until Gabrielle broke the surface. Harry had caught a glimpse of her during his ascent, a pale shape at the water's edge with her hands clasped and her whole body locked in the posture of someone who has already run through every possible outcome. Then Gabrielle surfaced, coughing and alive, and Fleur came apart from stillness all at once. She pulled her sister from the water. Gabrielle clung to her neck. Fleur was shaking. The crowd was very loud. Harry trod water at the edge and shivered, and waited for the rest of the gillyweed to give. Then Gabrielle twisted in her sister's arms and looked at him. It was not dramatic. She was 8 years old and had just woken from an enchanted sleep, and was almost certainly confused about several basic facts, including where she was. She reached for the person who had brought her up, the way children reach toward whatever warm thing presents itself. It was, objectively, a small thing. But Harry saw Fleur's face when she felt it, when she registered that her sister's arms were reaching past her, toward the boy still in the water. And Fleur's expression went through several things in quick succession before it settled on something Harry could not name. She went very still. She was looking at him in the way people look at something they expected to see and didn't, or something they didn't expect to see and did. He didn't know which one it was. He climbed out of the lake. Someone put a towel around his shoulders. He stood and dripped onto the bank and listened to Dumbledore argue, in the measured, patient voice of a man whose patience is not negotiable, that Harry Potter had demonstrated something the scoring rubric was not quite adequate to describe. The judges conferred. Harry received 45 points plus a bonus that placed him second overall at 85 total, tied with the Hufflepuff champion, which would have been interesting if he had the attention left to be interested in it. He didn't have it. His attention was somewhere else, entirely. Fleur still had Gabrielle against her chest. She was not looking at the judges or the crowd or anything in particular. She was looking at Harry with the expression of a person who has just arrived at a conclusion she hadn't set out to reach, and who doesn't yet know what to do with it. Whatever she was managing, she was keeping it carefully inside. But her eyes stayed on him as he stood there in his towel, dripping, trying to understand why she was looking at him, like he had done something he couldn't yet see the shape of. He had done the only thing there was to do. He didn't know yet what that was going to mean. The crowd moved around him. Dumbledore was still speaking. The February sky above the highlands was pale and high and completely indifferent to the fact that something had just shifted in the space between one girl's reaching arms and another girl's going still. Harry wrapped the towel tighter around his shoulders and looked out at the lake, at the surface already smoothing back to its ordinary grey, at nothing in particular. He had not done it to be recognized. He had done it because Fleur hadn't come, and Gabrielle was there, and leaving a child tied to a stone column underwater had not been an option he was capable of selecting. That was the whole of it. He didn't know why Fleur was looking at him, as though it were more than that. He would find out, he supposed. He generally found things out eventually, whether he wanted to or not. Fleur found Madame Maxime in the Beaubaton carriage at 7:30, which was late enough that the lamps had been lit, and early enough that the supper dishes hadn't been cleared. Maxime was at her writing desk, reviewing the day's scores in a ledger of extraordinary proportion, her enormous hands steady on the page. She looked up when Fleur knocked on the open door. She looked at Fleur's face, which was doing a thing Fleur's face had been doing since the bank, maintaining a particular, precise control, the way a person holds a glass they are not certain is structurally sound. And she set her quill down. "You want to see Dumbledore?" Maxime said. "Not a question." "Tonight, if it can be arranged." Maxime was quiet for a moment, which was a kind of answer. She had been peripherally acquainted with Veela custom for long enough to recognize what it looked like when a family prepared to move. There was a specific quality to it, not grief, not excitement, but a particular settledness, like water finding its level. And she had seen it in Fleur's posture since the moment the girl walked in. Maxime had worked with enough Veela heritage students to know that the customs around a life debt of this character were not theoretical and were not optional, and that the appropriate response from a person in her position was not to stand in the path of what was already decided. She also knew, because she was practical, that the boy was 14 years old and had the look of someone who had never once been on the receiving end of a decision made on his behalf by people who wished him well. "Fleur," she said, in the particular tone she used when she wanted something to land cleanly without weight. "You understand what you are setting in motion?" Fleur met her eyes. "Yes, madam." Maxime picked her quill back up. "I will send word ahead." The gargoyle outside Dumbledore's office admitted Fleur at 8 o'clock, after she had climbed the spiral staircase in the particular mood of someone who has already made a decision and is now simply executing it. The office was everything the gargoyle guarding it wasn't. Warm, cluttered, full of the soft clicking of silver instruments whose purposes she had never quite pinned down. A phoenix on a perch in the corner watched her enter with eyes that gave the impression of having already formed an opinion. The portraits of previous headmasters, most of them pretending to be asleep, were not pretending very well. Dumbledore rose to greet her. He was exactly as he always appeared in the places where one encountered him, silver-haired, blue-eyed behind his half-moon spectacles, the kind of tall that did not announce itself as tall, but simply occupied a room differently from other tall people. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. Fleur sat. She explained it without preamble, which she had decided beforehand was the only register available to her. A life debt had formed between her sister and Harry Potter. This was not her interpretation. It was the nature of what had happened. The bond was magical, binding, and did not require acknowledgement from either party to operate. Her family held the right, under Veela custom, to discharge that debt through a formal recognition of the rescuer as kin of the Delacour line. She intended to invoke that right. "The distinction from the Weasley boys' rescue," she said, because Dumbledore's expression had moved in a way that told her he was about to raise exactly that, "is twofold. Harry was not obligated to rescue Gabrielle. She was my hostage, not his. The tournament required him to retrieve only his own. What he did was outside any framework that could be called duty." She paused. "And Veela law specifically governs life debts incurred toward those of Veela blood. The Weasley family has no such custom and no such claim. This is not equivalent. Dumbledore regarded her over the rims of his spectacles for a moment. The phoenix made a soft sound. "I am," Dumbledore said, "somewhat familiar with the nature of life debts." His voice had the quality of a man who is being precise where he might easily be elaborate. "Someone wise told me, once, that such bonds represent magic at its deepest, its most impenetrable. I have never found occasion to disagree." He set his fingertips together. "I will not oppose the claim, Miss Delacour. It is not mine to oppose, but I will require that Harry be informed and present before any formal proceeding is initiated. He is owed that." "Of course." Dumbledore's expression did not change in any way that was easily quantifiable, but the room felt slightly different when he spoke again. "And I will ask you one thing before we go further." He let the pause exist before continuing. "Do you understand what you are proposing for a boy who has had no family to speak of?" Fleur was quiet. She had prepared for this question, not the specific words of it, but the substance, which she had known was coming because she had asked it of herself on the walk up here. She had asked it of herself, and found that the honest answer required her to look at something she had not quite looked at directly since the bank. "I think," she said carefully, "that it will not be a simple thing for him to receive something he did not ask for and has no practice receiving." A pause. "I think that is not a reason to withhold it." Dumbledore considered this. "No," he said after a moment. "I don't think it is." He rose, moved to the door, and dispatched a portrait, one that was awake and clearly had been the entire time, to carry a message to Gryffindor Tower. Harry arrived looking the way he usually looked when summoned by the headmaster, prepared for bad news in the specific manner of someone for whom bad news arrives often enough to maintain a standing preparation. He registered the presence of Fleur, who was still in the chair, and the expression on his face shifted briefly into something that was not quite surprise, and not quite wariness, but lived in the space between them. He sat in the second chair. Dumbledore explained. Harry listened without interrupting, which Fleur noted was not the response of someone unconcerned, but of someone whose first instinct in the face of the incomprehensible was to gather as much information as possible before speaking. When Dumbledore had finished, Harry said, "The what?" "The kin claim," Dumbledore said, patiently. "An acknowledgement of standing. Not blood, but name. Miss Delacour's family will formally recognize you as kin, as someone who acted in the place of kin and is, by the logic of Veela custom, therefore owed the recognition of it." Harry looked at Fleur. Fleur looked back, steadily, which was easier than looking at the part of the room where his expression lived. "And I can't—" He stopped, reconsidered, started again. "It's not something I can refuse." "The life debt itself is not subject to refusal," Dumbledore said. "Such bonds do not operate by consent. What the claim adds is simply its acknowledgement in a form that means something to the family making it." He paused. "I should also tell you, so that there is no misunderstanding. This does not displace the protection your mother left you at Privet Drive. What resides there is not a matter of legal standing or family claim. It is a different order of magic entirely. You are not being taken from one place to another." He let this settle. "You are simply being added to someone else's." Harry was quiet for a moment. He turned the idea over, visibly, the way you turn something unfamiliar in your hands to understand its shape. "All right," he said. Dumbledore nodded, as though all right were exactly the right answer. Perhaps it was. Harry stood, said good night to both of them, and left the office. His footsteps moved away down the spiral staircase, and then were gone. Fleur stayed a moment longer than she needed to, standing near the window. Through it, she could see the distant gleam of the black lake in the dark. The same water, the same lake, already returned to its ordinary appearance. She had done a thing she could not undo. She had done it for reasons she could have stated clearly if asked, and she was not sorry, and she also understood, in the specific way you understand something after you have said it aloud to a person who then walks away from you, that she had underestimated how much it would cost her to say yes. The boy had looked at her, in the moment before he left, the way Gabrielle had looked at him on the bank, as if she had simply done the only thing there was to do. She supposed she had. By the time Harry came down to breakfast the following morning, the story had already beaten him there. He could tell by the way the great hall rearranged itself when he walked in. Not obviously, not with the full-body swivel of first year, but in the particular sideways way of a place that has been discussing someone and would prefer them not to know it. He got his porridge. He sat down. Across the Gryffindor table, Dean and Seamus were having a conversation at slightly too deliberate a volume about something entirely unrelated to him, which meant they had been talking about him 30 seconds ago. Harry ate his porridge and decided not to mind. Ron sat down across from him 2 minutes later, already red in the face in the way Ron got when he'd been thinking hard about something and the thinking hadn't resolved it. "So," Ron said. Harry waited. "So," Ron said again, in a slightly different register, as though this one might get further. It didn't. He reached for the toast instead. "You could just ask," Harry said. "I'm not asking anything." Ron put butter on his toast with a great deal of concentration. It's a lot, is all I'm saying." Harry looked at him. Ron's ears were reddening, which they tended to do when he was feeling something he didn't have the words for yet. Harry had learned, over 4 years of close association, that the appropriate response to this was to wait. Not forever, but for a bit. "Were you there?" Ron said, finally. "When they told you? Was it strange?" "Yes," Harry said. "To all 3. Ron nodded, as though this answered something, and also raised several more things he was going to need time to process. Harry finished his porridge. The enchanted ceiling above them was a flat grey that matched the lake outside, which Harry found appropriate. "It's not that I think you shouldn't have done it," Ron said, somewhere around his second piece of toast. "Obviously you should have. I'd have done it." He paused. "Probably." "Ron, I'm just saying, she was right there." He gestured vaguely with his knife, which was alarming. "I was right there too, you know, in the lake, also needing rescuing." "I know. I rescued you." "Right." Ron put the knife down. "And nobody's making any claims about me." Harry considered this. He understood, he thought, the specific shape of what Ron wasn't quite saying. Or rather, what Ron was saying around the edges, the way Ron generally got at the things that actually bothered him. It wasn't about Fleur. It wasn't even about the claim, exactly. It was about the fact that something had been formally decided on Harry's behalf by people who had not met him yet, and had chosen to anyway, and that was a category of thing that Ron's experience didn't contain a file for. Harry wasn't sure his own experience contained one, either, but that was a different problem. "I don't know what it means yet," Harry said. "In practice, Dumbledore said it doesn't change anything about the summer." "Right," Ron said, again in the tone that meant he was satisfied with this information and was going to think about it more later, in private, where Harry couldn't watch him do it. Hermione dropped her bag onto the bench beside Harry, with the purposeful thump of a person who has been to the library before 7 o'clock in the morning and found the experience educational and also somewhat annoying. "There's almost nothing," she said, in the restricted section even, which is actually quite interesting, because you'd expect something in magical creatures and their cultural frameworks. There's an entire chapter on Veela in the 1962 edition, but it says almost nothing about kin customs specifically. Just appearance, enthrallment properties, the transformation when they're angry. She sat down. The tradition appears to be oral, passed within communities, rather than documented. "So we can't read about it," Harry said. "We can't read about it," Hermione confirmed, with the specific frustration of someone who believes most problems are solvable through sufficient reading. Which means we're relying entirely on what the Delacours tell us about their own customs, which is technically primary source material but isn't independently verifiable. "That's what legal arrangements based on trust generally are," Harry said. Hermione looked at him. "When did you start saying things like that?" Harry had no idea. He ate the last of his porridge. He was between herbology and transfiguration, crossing the third-floor corridor with his bag digging into his shoulder, when Fleur Delacour stepped out of an alcove and fell into step beside him in a manner that suggested the alcove had been deliberate. "I have news," she said. It came out very formal, as if she had practiced the register and found it the safest available option. Her silver-blonde hair was pulled back more severely than usual. She was holding her books against her chest with both arms, which was not a thing Harry had seen her do before. "My parents have been notified. My mother's response arrived this morning. The formal application is being filed through the British Ministry's Department of International Magical Cooperation, which coordinates with the ISNEW, and through them it will be recognized internationally." Harry walked and listened. The corridor was mostly empty. A pair of second years at the far end took one look at Fleur, and immediately found something compelling to examine on the stone wall. "There will be a ceremony," Fleur continued, after the third task, the formal acknowledgement. "My grandmother, my mother's mother, she will need to be involved. She is—" Fleur paused, searching for the right word in English. "She is the authority, in our family, for matters of this kind." Harry nodded. Then he said, "Can I say no?" Fleur stopped walking. Harry stopped too, half a step ahead, and turned. Her expression had gone through something brief and difficult before arriving at a controlled version of itself. "The life debt," she said, "is not yours to refuse. The bond exists whether or not you acknowledge it. It was formed at the moment you made your choice. It does not require your consent to operate." She paused again, but this time it felt less like searching for English and more like choosing which of several true things to say. "The kin claim is my family's act. It is not a request." "All right," Harry said. It was the second time in 2 days he'd said, "all right," when what he meant was something more complicated than all right. He seemed to be developing a habit. Fleur looked at him for a moment. "You are very calm about this." "I'm not," Harry said. "I just don't know where to put it yet." She nodded, once, as though this were the most sensible thing she had heard on the subject, and turned and walked back the way she'd come. Snape had appeared at the corridor's far end sometime during the exchange, materializing from a side passage, as Snape tended to, in the unhurried way of someone with nowhere urgent to be and everywhere relevant to notice. He paused. He observed with the particular attention of a man who has learned to treat everything he did not expect as information he had not yet categorized, the Delacour girl walking one way and Potter walking the other. His left arm felt the way it had been feeling for weeks, heavier. Not painful. Not yet. but heavier, the way a sky feels heavier before it decides to do something about itself. The Delacour girl was invoking something old. Dumbledore was allowing it. Dumbledore allowing anything, in Snape's experience, meant either that the thing was useful to him or that it was inevitable, and the distinction between those two things was often narrower than it appeared. Snape filed the observation away, with several others he was compiling, under a heading he had not yet named, turned, and walked back down the passage without having said anything at all. The letter was on Harry's pillow when he came up to the dormitory after dinner. He noticed it from the doorway, the white of the envelope against the red of the Gryffindor bedding, sealed with silver wax that caught the candlelight in a way that ordinary wax did not. He crossed the room and picked it up. The handwriting on the front was very precise and unfamiliar, and it slanted slightly to the left, and his name was spelled correctly, which he noted because the mail that found him at Hogwarts had an unusually high rate of misspelling. He turned it over. The return address was in French. He didn't recognize the town, but the country was clear enough. He stood there with the letter in his hands for a long moment, aware of Ron getting changed across the room without looking at him, aware of the fire and the comfortable familiar smell of the dormitory, aware that he was holding something sent deliberately, specifically, to him by someone who had decided he was worth the postage. He set it on the bedside table. He would read it in the morning, when whatever was happening in his chest had settled into something he could think around. He got into bed and looked at the ceiling and did not sleep for a long time. The letter was still on his bedside table when Harry woke up. He had not moved it in the night. He was not entirely sure he had wanted to. He lay on his back for a moment, looking at the ceiling of the dormitory, listening to the particular morning sounds of 5 boys who had been sleeping in the same room for 4 years, Ron's slow breathing, Dean's occasional shift, the creak of Seamus turning over. And then he sat up and picked up the envelope. The wax was silver, and the handwriting was still very precise. His name still slanted slightly left. He turned it over and looked at the French return address for a moment, long enough to establish that looking at it was not going to tell him anything he didn't already know, and then he broke the seal and read. Apolline Delacour wrote in careful English, which Harry suspected was not her most fluent language, and which she had used anyway, as a deliberate courtesy. The grammar was formal, not stiff, but the kind of formal that comes from a person who takes language seriously and has chosen each word with that seriousness intact. She did not begin by thanking him. She began by telling him what had happened on the bank of the lake when Gabrielle surfaced, that Fleur had looked at her daughter's face and understood, before any word had been said, what kind of act had brought her up. She wrote, "I want you to understand that I do not thank you for coming in last. That is a tournament result, and it means nothing to me. I thank you for deciding that my daughter was worth the cost of last place. These are not the same thing. One is an outcome. The other is a choice." She wrote, "Gabrielle has spoken of very little else since she returned to the carriage that evening. She is 8 years old, and she has already chosen you as the best kind of person. She is frequently correct about these matters. The letter was 3 pages long. It did not feel like 3 pages. It felt like the length of someone deciding to know you, which is a different measurement altogether." Harry read it twice. A second letter arrived at breakfast, delivered by a different owl. A large barn owl, with the unhurried competence of a bird that has crossed the channel before and considers it unremarkable. This one was shorter. Monsieur Delacour wrote in English that was slightly less fluent than his wife's, but used with the same deliberate courtesy. His letter was 3 sentences. That he had read Apolline's letter before she sent it, and found it said what needed saying. That he wanted Harry to know the application had been filed, and that the Delacour name would be behind him as a matter of family record, not tournament politics. And that he hoped Harry's teachers were giving him adequate preparation for the third task, because Beauxbaton students competed at a higher theoretical level, and he would need to be ready. Harry sat with both letters in front of him, and his porridge getting cold, and was not sure what to do. Fleur appeared at the Gryffindor table at mid-morning, after charms. She sat beside him in one of the empty stretches of bench, and produced, from somewhere in her robes, a single folded sheet of parchment, bearing a seal Harry didn't recognize, a stylized shape that might have been a bird or a flame or something between the two. "The filing," she said, "has been confirmed by the Department of International Magical Cooperation." She unfolded the parchment and smoothed it on the table between them. Harry looked at it. The language was formal enough to make Apolline's letter look conversational. "They have transmitted it through the British seat to the ICW proper. The formal acknowledgement is pending, but the administrative record is now established." She paused. "Dumbledore has a copy." Harry looked at the seal at the bottom. It was very official. It was a document that existed in a filing system somewhere, that bore his name in neat bureaucratic script, that would not unexist because he didn't quite understand it. "Right," he said. Fleur refolded the parchment. "There is nothing further required of you until the ceremony after the third task." Harry found Dumbledore in the corridor outside the Transfiguration classroom that evening, which was not planned on either side. Dumbledore was simply coming from a direction Harry happened to be walking toward. Dumbledore looked, as he generally did, as if the universe had arranged this corridor meeting specifically for his convenience. "Can it be stopped?" Harry asked. He had not planned to ask it quite this directly, or quite this soon. But the parchment with the seal was still in his bag, and the question had been sitting in him since morning. Dumbledore considered this with the same expression he brought to all questions he had already answered in his own mind. "The life debt cannot," he said. "Such bonds do not operate by consent. They are formed by action, and the action occurred." He walked with Harry a few paces before continuing. "The kin claim, in theory, could be withdrawn if the Delacours chose to withdraw it. They have not indicated any such intention." He let this sit. "I am told," he added, "that Gabrielle cannot stop talking about you." Harry said nothing. "Magic at its deepest," Dumbledore said, "is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is simply very certain." That night, after dinner, Harry sat at his desk in the dormitory with parchment and a quill and tried to write back to Apolline Delacour. He wrote, "Dear Madame Delacour, thank you for your letter. It was—" He crossed that out. He wrote, "Dear Madame Delacour, I appreciate you writing to me." I wanted to say that. He looked at that for a moment and then crossed it out too. The problem was not that he didn't know what to say. He knew approximately what he wanted to say, that her letter had been the most specific kindness anyone had directed at him in recent memory, and that he had read it twice, and that he did not know yet what to do with someone deciding to know him, but that he thought he might manage. He knew what he wanted to say. He did not know how to say it in a way that wouldn't sound like he was explaining himself to a stranger, because she was a stranger, except that her letter had not felt like it was written by one. He stared at the parchment. The fire popped. Ron had fallen asleep with a Quidditch magazine over his face. He wrote 7 words. He sealed the envelope before he could open it again, and cross those out too. He did not know if they were the right 7 words. He knew they were honest, which was the only qualification he was certain of. The following evening, Fleur came down to the Gryffindor end of the Great Hall for dinner. She had been sitting at the beau bâton table, or standing or passing through, most evenings since the second task, but this was the first time she sat at the Gryffindor table in an empty stretch of bench across from Harry, without explaining why she'd made the crossing. She asked him how his transfiguration lesson had gone. He told her. She offered an observation about the specific vanishment technique that made McGonagall's approach sound, from the outside, slightly overcomplicated. Harry said that was accurate. They talked about the third task, without officially declaring they were preparing for it. She told him her professor at Beauxbatons believed in theoretical frameworks that translated to any magical context. He told her 3 years at Hogwarts had given him entirely practical experience, and almost no theoretical framework whatsoever. She looked at him, as though this were both very sad and quite useful. Several people stared. Neville, who was sitting 3 seats down and had apparently decided to mind his own business, failed to mind his own business. He watched the conversation with the expression of someone who finds a thing completely obvious, but is too polite to say so. Ron looked at his food. He looked at it for most of dinner, and then he looked up when Fleur had gone and said, with the specific casualness of someone who has thought about something for several hours and is trying to make it sound like they just remembered, "She's not actually that bad to talk to, is she?" "No," Harry said. "She's not." Ron nodded. He finished his food. He didn't say anything else about it, but Harry thought there was a fraction more ease in his shoulders than there had been when the evening started, and he decided to count that as progress. Harry was in the library when Fleur found him, which she appeared to have known in advance. He had been there since the end of afternoon lessons, working through the stack of parchment that had accumulated since the second task. The library was mostly empty at this hour. He had managed 2/3 of his transfiguration problem when Fleur pulled the chair across from him and sat down without asking. She set a folded letter on the table between them. It was several sheets of thin paper, folded precisely, the edges sharp the way paper is, only when someone has folded it on a hard surface. The handwriting visible on the top fold was not Apolline's. It slanted the opposite direction from his name on the first letter, and had the quality of something very old and very certain. "My grandmother," Fleur said. "She has written the full terms. My mother translated. My grandmother does not write in English." She smoothed the letter flat. "I should have had this before I spoke to Dumbledore. I had only the outline." She said this without apology and without visible embarrassment, in the way she delivered information she found inaccurate about herself, directly as correction, without additional suffering. "What does it say?" Harry asked. She had memorized it. She did not look at the letter while she spoke. "Kin of the Delacour line, by deed not blood, carries the following. Shelter. Any home where a Delacour lives owes you a roof and a meal without condition. Protection. If someone moves against you where a Delacour can be reached, they act in your name. And acknowledgement. Your name is recorded in our family's oral genealogy alongside the deed. In dealings with other Veela heritage families, or in courts where Veela custom has standing, you are recognized as kin." Harry had been listening carefully. "And what do I have to do?" "Attend the ceremony. After the third task." A pause. "That is the whole of your obligation. You cannot be compelled to act as kin in any specific way. You are recognized, not enlisted." He turned this over. "You're telling me it has more substance than I thought." "I am telling you the full terms," Fleur said, "because you asked what you were agreeing to, and you deserved a complete answer. And I did not give you one." She refolded the letter. "My grandmother will send her blessing through my mother rather than attend herself. She does not travel at her age. But her blessing is not optional. The ceremony cannot proceed without it. Harry nodded. He thought about the grandmother, someone he would never meet, who had never met him, who was apparently the authority on whether he was worthy of the acknowledgement her family's custom required. He found he wasn't bothered by this. People had been making decisions about him, based on things he'd done without knowing him for as long as he could remember. At least this one was a decision he appeared to have earned. Then, because the question had sat in him since the lake, and the various explanations around it hadn't quite answered it. Why? Fleur looked at him. "I did what anyone would have done," Harry said. Not modesty. He had thought about it enough to know it was a genuine observation. Anyone in the same situation, with the same information? No one did, Fleur said. Only you. She said it without inflection, the way you state something that is simply true. The accuracy of it landed in him between agreement and argument. He could say it was circumstantial, that no one else happened to be in the position, but he knew that was not the point she was making. The point was the decision, not the opportunity. He did not say anything. "An undischarged life debt," Fleur continued in a different register, "is considered by my family a wound in our integrity. My grandmother uses that word specifically. Not a debt, a wound. Something that cannot be left to heal on its own." A pause. "This is not about changing your life. It is about the fact that Gabrielle owes hers to someone, and that someone must be formally acknowledged to exist." Harry thought about that. About what it meant to be the person whose existence someone must formally acknowledge. He had been good, for a long time, at needing very little. The arrangement at the Dursleys had been manageable precisely because he had never thought of it as home. Because thinking of something as home and then finding it wasn't one was a precise and specific kind of damage he had stopped accumulating. He gave without hesitation, Ron his toast, Neville his notes, a stranger's child his chance at a tournament placing. Giving was an outward motion. His hands understood it. Receiving was different. Receiving required him to hold still while someone approached, and hold still while they stayed. He could name this about himself, could see it clearly and accurately, and the clarity did not make it stop being true. Appolline's letter had sat on his bedside table all night. He had read it twice and not known what to do with it. He understood the problem. He did not have a solution for it yet. He thought that might be all right, as long as he showed up for the ceremony. "I'll be there," he said. Fleur looked at him for a moment, as if deciding whether that was the right place to put the conversation down. Then she nodded. "Good." They stayed in the library for another hour. She pulled his transfiguration problem toward her, and observed that the Hogwarts approach to vanishment was entirely practical, and almost entirely absent of theoretical foundation, which made it inflexible under novel conditions. She talked. He asked questions. Occasionally she took his quill and wrote, rather than explained, because she was apparently someone who found showing faster than telling. It was practical and quiet, and something Harry recognized without a word for, the particular ease of working alongside someone whose competence you respect, and who respects yours in return. He had thought the wizarding world would feel like this before he arrived in it at 11 years old and discovered it was complicated in all the same ways the other world was. He told her this, somewhat to his own surprise. Fleur was quiet. "What did you think it would be?" "Less administrative, different from places I'd been before." She looked at him with the expression he was beginning to identify, the one that meant she was reassessing something she had assumed. "It is administrative," she said. "But you are not like the places I have been before." He decided not to ask what she meant. The answer was probably something he needed more time to receive. Ron was in the common room when Harry came back. He had homework out and was not doing it. "How was it?" he said. "Good. She's been showing me Beauxbaton's methods, different from McGonagall." Neville looked up from the armchair by the fire. "I think it's brilliant, actually. The practical exchange. Both directions." He said it in his precise way, as if he had considered it, and arrived at a verdict. Ron looked at Neville. Neville looked back, undisturbed. A pause of the kind that happens when someone has said something demonstrably true, and the person who wanted to argue cannot locate an argument. "Right," Ron said. He turned back to his homework. His ears were the normal color. He wrote the first line of his essay with the air of someone who has made a decision and intends to stand by it. And Harry opened his charms reading and said nothing, because some things resolved themselves fastest when you left them room. The version of events circulating among Hogwarts students by the third week of March was approximately 30% accurate. The accurate parts: Harry Potter had rescued Gabrielle Delacour from the Black Lake when Fleur hadn't made it to her. A life debt had formed. Fleur's family had done something formal about it. The inaccurate parts, most of what came after, the version Harry heard most often, delivered in the studied, casual way of people who want you to know they've been talking about you, but not to take it personally, was that the Delacours were adopting him. A secondary version held that Fleur had proposed marriage to discharge the debt, which Harry thought was both wrong and significantly more interesting than what had actually happened. A third version, originating somewhere in Slytherin, maintained that it was a dark arts arrangement of some kind, and that Harry's scar was involved. Ron was annoyed by all three. Hermione was annoyed by all three for different, more specific reasons. Harry was mostly tired. He had been famous since he was 1 year old, and had long since made his peace with the fact that the publicly circulating version of any event he was involved in would be wrong in almost every particular that mattered. The kin claim was no different, except that it involved the Delacour, and he had met them now, or met Fleur, and read Apolline's letter twice, and was therefore working with actual information rather than the rumor's approximation. He found it was easier to not mind being wrong about in print when you knew the truth of the thing, and the truth was not upsetting. He said this to Hermione. Hermione said she was glad he felt that way, and then said, without particular transition, "Skeeter knows." Harry stopped walking. "She's been asking questions about Veela kin law for the past week," Hermione said. "I recognized the research. She asked 2 of the same reference questions at the library that I did, which means she's found the same approximate sources and reached the same approximate conclusions. She wants the story." A pause, in which Hermione's expression did the thing it did when she had already solved a problem and was deciding how much to explain. "I've already handled it." "How?" "The same way I've been handling her since November." Hermione adjusted her bag strap. "She won't publish." Harry looked at her. Hermione looked back steadily, with the composed expression of someone who has made a decision she does not expect to be questioned on. He did not question it. The Durmstrang champion approached Harry at the end of a defense session in the 4th week of March, which surprised Harry because their interactions to this point had been nodded acknowledgments across the Great Hall, and the specific, competitive courtesy of people who have been obliged to be in the same room for 6 months and have managed not to dislike each other. He came across the courtyard with the purposeful directness of a large person who has learned that looking like you know where you're going generally works, and said, without preamble, "The Veela claim, it is true?" "Yes," Harry said. The Durmstrang champion nodded, in the way people nod when they have confirmed information they found unlikely but are willing to update on. In my country, he said, there are old magical agreements of this kind. Binding. Very serious. A pause. I did not know you were the kind of person who invoked them. Harry thought about this. I didn't know either, he said. The Durmstrang champion looked at him for a moment, with an expression Harry recognized as respect rendered in a language where respect comes out looking like assessment. He nodded again, once, and walked away. Harry counted this as a successful conversation. The Hufflepuff champion said something shorter and warmer later that same day in the corridor outside Charms, that he thought it was good, what Harry had done, both in the lake and after. That the whole thing had the feeling of something right, even if he couldn't have explained the mechanism. Harry said thank you. The Hufflepuff champion smiled in the straightforward way that appeared to be his natural register, and moved on to his next class. Harry thought, not for the first time, that he was probably a genuinely good person, and felt the particular low-level discomfort he sometimes felt around genuinely good people, as if their goodness was a thing he hadn't been told how to receive properly. The judges had a disagreement. Harry knew about it the way he knew about most things that happened in the administrative levels above his head. Hermione told him, having overheard something in the corridor near the staff room. Karkaroff, the Durmstrang headmaster, a man whose smile Harry had never trusted, had raised the kin claim with Maxime as an issue of tournament equity. His position, apparently, was that a formal alliance between one champion's family and another champion created a structural advantage. Maxime's counter, also apparently, was that Beauxbaton's champion had invoked an established cultural right that predated the tournament by several centuries, and that the tournament's business was the tournament, not Veela custom. The disagreement had not been resolved. Karkaroff had brought it to Bagman, who had found it delightful, and said so several times in ways that did not constitute resolving it, and it had eventually gone to Dumbledore, who had, in the way of someone who has made a decision and is simply waiting for the room to catch up, declined to interfere. Fleur told Harry about it herself a few days later, with the tone of someone reporting a nuisance that has been managed. Karkaroff has no standing in this, she said. My family's custom is not the tournament's jurisdiction, and Maxime said so correctly. She paused. Bagman finds it entertaining. He keeps asking me questions. I have stopped answering them. Harry, who had had several years of practice not answering Ludo Bagman's questions, thought this was a sound approach. After 2 tasks, Harry and the Hufflepuff champion were tied at 85 points, first place, jointly, with the 3rd task 3 months away. The 3rd task would take place in the Hogwarts grounds, in a maze. The prize was 1,000 galleons and the Triwizard Cup, which was the kind of prize that sounded significant until you had seen the inside of the Black Lake and understood that most things you survived were their own reward. A letter arrived through Fleur on a Tuesday in early April. Not from Apolline this time, from Fleur's grandmother, transmitted through Apolline because the grandmother did not write in English, and this was in French. Fleur translated it, standing in the corridor outside the Great Hall, reading aloud without looking up from the page. She sends her recognition of the deed. She will not attend the 3rd task. She does not travel. But she has instructed my mother to bring her blessing to the ceremony, and Apolline has confirmed she will attend in person. Fleur looked up. The ceremony will be held in the days immediately after the 3rd task, the 24th of June or the days following. Harry looked at her. Your mother is coming to Hogwarts? For the ceremony? Yes. Fleur folded the letter with the same precision she brought to everything. She has already written to ask what she should know about you before she arrives. I told her that you are 14 years old, and that you find unexpected kindness more difficult to receive than unexpected danger, and that she should be patient with this. She looked at him to see if he was going to object to this description. He was not. She wrote back that she understood. She said, "My grandmother said the same thing about the deed itself, that only someone who does not expect to matter would choose the way you chose." Harry looked at the folded letter in Fleur's hands and thought about a woman he had never met, reading a description of him over breakfast in a house somewhere in France, deciding she understood something about why he had done what he'd done. He found he did not mind being understood at this distance. It was easier than being looked at directly. "Tell her I'll be there," he said. Fleur tucked the letter inside her robes. "I already did," she said. April became May, the way that months do during the heavy middle of a school year, not all at once but by accumulation, one evening's lengthening light at a time. Harry and Fleur met in the evenings 2 or 3 times a week. They had not formally agreed to this. It had settled into habit the way that useful arrangements do, through repetition and the absence of anyone suggesting they stop. The Hufflepuff champion joined occasionally. He was easy to work alongside, low on competitive energy and high on practical curiosity. But usually it was the two of them, finding whatever empty room or quiet corridor section offered itself, running through spells from Beaubaton's curriculum that Harry had never encountered, and defensive techniques from Harry's 4 years at Hogwarts that Fleur found, in equal measure, impressive and alarming. She taught him a containment charm from the Beaubaton's 6th-year sequence that Harry's defense education had apparently never got around to, and a redirection spell that could be applied after any block to send the original curse along a new trajectory. He could not see why these weren't standard, and said so. Fleur said that Beaubaton taught theory systematically, and Hogwarts appeared to teach crisis management, and that both had obvious strengths and obvious gaps. He taught her the Patronus. This was a more complicated exchange. Harry had known the charm since 3rd year. It was in his body the way the spells he'd learned youngest were always in his body. Not thought about, simply done. He demonstrated first the incantation, the approach to the memory, the cast. His stag emerged from the end of his wand, silver and calm, moved once across the room, and dissipated. Fleur watched with an expression he had learned to identify. Not impressed exactly, but recalibrating. "The memory," she said. "It must be a happy one. The happiest you can hold. And you can hold that while casting." He thought about it. He thought about what the happiest memory he could hold was, and found it was not actually a single memory, but a feeling, and that the feeling had changed over the years in its source without changing in its character. He said, "With practice." Fleur considered the length of the room. She found her memory. Harry could see the moment she found it, some shift in her posture that was not quite relaxation, but something adjacent. She cast. The light came from her wand in a shape that was almost there. Not absent. Not nothing, but not fully formed either, pulling toward a definition it hadn't reached. She held it for 3 seconds. It dissolved before it made itself entirely clear. She lowered her wand. She was quiet for a moment, looking at the space where the charm had been. "That was real," Harry said. "It did not resolve. First time is supposed to dissolve." He had no idea if this was a universal truth or just his experience, but he thought it was probably the former. What matters is, you made something. Fleur looked at him for a moment, in the way she looked at statements she was deciding whether to accept. Then she nodded, once, and tried again. She would, he thought, get there. She approached everything with the patience of someone who has decided that failing at a thing is simply the first step toward not failing, and Harry found this more useful to watch than he would have expected. It was on an evening in mid-May that Fleur watched him work through a full defensive sequence: block, contain, redirect, assess, with the ease of long practice, and said, "How old were you when you first used defensive magic against something that was actually trying to kill you?" Harry thought about it. 11. She was quiet. He finished the sequence. "At Beaubaton," she said, "we do not fight things that are trying to kill us until our 6th year. This is considered appropriate." She paused. "You have been doing it for 3 years. 4, Harry said, counting the troll. She looked at him for a long moment. Not admiringly. She was not the admiring type, and he had stopped expecting that from her, and was glad he had. Not with pity, either. With the specific expression of someone recalibrating around a fact they had not had before. He had the sense of something shifting in her understanding, some category he had been in, being revised. "The kin claim," she said finally, "was the right thing." Harry picked up his wand again. "You thought it wasn't?" "I thought it was an obligation that became the right thing," she said. "I am revising this." He looked at her. She looked back evenly. He said, "That's the most honest thing you've said to me." She said, "I try to be honest. I am not always fast." Ginny found Harry by the lake one afternoon, near the end of May, in the last of the weak spring light. She had her shoes off and her feet in the grass, and the look of someone who had made a decision to be where she was and had followed through on it. "Harry," she said. "Ginny." She looked at the lake for a moment. Then, "When it's over, the tournament, the ceremony, you're still going to the Dursleys for the summer?" Harry looked at the lake too. He had thought about this. The Dursleys had not changed. His summers had not changed. Dumbledore had been clear that the blood protection at Privet Drive was a different order of thing from the kin claim and was not being displaced. "Yeah," he said. "I still have to go." She nodded. She was 13 and small, and had the particular directness of someone who had grown up in a house full of people who talked over each other, and had learned to make her point before anyone could interrupt. "But someone will know where you are while you're there." "Yes," Harry said. "Someone will." She considered this with the serious face she brought to things that mattered to her. Then she seemed to decide it was enough, or not enough, but better than what had been true before, and leaned back on her hands and said nothing else about it. The hedge maze went up in the last week of May, growing from the Hogwarts grounds over the course of several days with the magic-assisted speed of something that had been designed to be impressive, and achieved this without difficulty. Harry stood at its edge one evening in early June and tried to estimate the scale of it. It was very large, the kind of large that altered the landscape around itself. The hedges were already high enough that standing at the edge you could not see what was on the other side of the first turning, which was, Harry supposed, the point. Ron came to stand beside him. "Big," Ron said. "Yeah. You and I are going to have to go in there." "Me? Yes. You can watch from the stands." Ron appeared to process this distinction without pleasure. "Still," he said, "big." He looked at the maze for a long moment. Then, in the tone Harry had learned to identify as Ron's opening to saying something he had been not saying for a while. I know I've been odd about it. The Fleur thing." Harry waited. "It's not that I think you shouldn't," Ron said. "I know you should. It was obvious that you'd do exactly that in the lake. That's just who you are. He was looking at the maze, not at Harry. I just thought about it, and I think I was. The thing that was bothering me was that her family knew your name in 3 days. And my family has known your name for 4 years, and it's not the same thing. He stopped. That's not your fault. No, Harry agreed. It's not. Ron exhaled. Right. He kicked a clump of grass. I just thought you should know what it was, instead of thinking I was being stupid about Fleur. I didn't think you were being stupid, Harry said. I thought you were being you. Ron looked at him with the slightly raw expression that appeared when he had said something real and wasn't sure if it had landed correctly. Yeah, he said. That's probably fair. They stood there until the light went, looking at the maze that would be the 3rd task. And the 3rd task was 3 weeks away, and Harry thought about the scale of a thing that could be lost in, and then thought about the fact that he wasn't going to be lost in it alone. And he wasn't sure if that made the size of it more or less frightening, but he thought it made it survivable. The evening of the 24th of June was warm and clear, and the maze stood at the edge of the Hogwarts grounds, looking like what it was. A thing that had been designed to prevent you from knowing what was inside it. Harry stood at the entrance to it with his wand in his hand, and the roar of the assembled crowd at his back. The Hufflepuff champion was a few feet to his right. They had been sent in together, tied at 85 points, first to enter. They had not discussed a plan. In the corridors before the event, walking past the crowds and the banners and the cheerful institutional spectacle of the tournament's final night, the Hufflepuff champion had looked at Harry and said, "Good luck in there," in a tone that meant it. And Harry had said, "You too," in a tone that meant it equally, and that had been the whole of their agreement. He thought this was probably the correct amount of agreement to have. In the stands, in the section reserved for Beauxbatons, Fleur was watching. He could not see her from here, but he knew she was there. Apolline was somewhere in the crowd, too. He had not managed to see her in the rush of the evening's preparation, but Fleur had said she was here, and he took this as given. The horn sounded. They entered. The maze swallowed the outside world with the efficiency of something that had been enchanted specifically for that purpose. The crowd noise cut away. The gap between the hedges narrowed. Harry moved carefully, wand up, reading the maze the way he had learned to read dangerous situations, not looking for what was expected, but attending to what was there. He encountered a boggart first. It wore a green flash of light, which was, he thought, the most efficient nightmare possible, the thing he actually feared most, condensed to its barest form. He used the ridiculous jinx and moved past it. He encountered a sphinx later, which gave him a riddle instead of simply attacking him, and he solved it. The answer was spider, which felt like an irony, and it let him pass. He heard sounds from other parts of the maze that he couldn't locate. The crack of spellwork, a distant shout, nothing he could interpret. He moved toward the center. He was not certain how long he had been inside when he heard the Hufflepuff champion's voice from somewhere to his left, calling his name. Not in distress, just locating. Harry followed the sound. They converged from different angles, arriving simultaneously at a split in the hedges that opened into a wider space. And at the center of the space, on a plinth, stood the Triwizard Cup. It was silver, and its light was very steady in the dim maze dark, and it looked exactly like what it was, which was a conclusion. They looked at each other across the plinth. "Together?" the Hufflepuff champion said. "Together," Harry agreed. He thought later, he would think about it for a long time after, that this had felt correct. Not a decision that required justification, just a thing that was true about the two of them, and about the tournament, as it had actually unfolded, rather than as it had been designed to unfold. They reached for the cup at the same moment. The portkey activated. The world inverted. Harry landed hard on ground that was not Hogwarts. He registered this before he registered anything else. The grass was different. The sky was too dark, the trees too close, the quality of the air wrong in the specific way of a place that has history you don't know yet and can feel the weight of. He heard a voice say, "Kill the spare." The killing curse was green, and it was immediate. The Hufflepuff champion dropped. He did not fall in the way people fall when startled. He fell in the way a person falls when the person is suddenly absent, when the body has become a body, with no provision for the people watching. Harry's mind tried to refuse what he had just seen. His mind was not given the option. He had no time to grieve it. He had no time for anything except to survive what was coming, which arrived in the form of a robed figure. Wormtail. Harry understood without needing to see his face. Wormtail, who had been dead and was not, who had been a rat and a man and a traitor long before Harry had known any of these things. And a stone cauldron already heating in the grass, and a spell that left him bound to a gravestone he could not read. The ritual came next. He hadn't known about this ritual. He didn't want to be learning about it now, in this way, while bound to a dead man's headstone in a graveyard he didn't know. Bone from the earth, flesh from a servant who didn't hesitate, blood from an enemy, and the enemy was him, and the blade was small, and the cut was nothing, and what came after was not nothing at all. What came out of the cauldron was Voldemort. Harry was very calm, the way someone is calm when their body has decided to be calm on their behalf, because the alternative is not functional. He had been afraid of this for 4 years, and the actual thing, arriving at last, had a quality of confirmation that was almost a relief. It passed in approximately 3 seconds. The Death Eaters came when they were called. They materialized from the dark at the edge of the graveyard and formed their circle, and Voldemort moved among them and spoke. And Harry tried to think about what he had learned and what Fleur had shown him, and whether there was another way out of this graveyard. There was not a way that did not go through a duel. Voldemort gave him back his wand, which Harry thought was a mistake, and they duelled. He was 14 years old, and he was duelling Voldemort in a graveyard, and what happened next was not something he could have anticipated or planned for. Their spells connected, the light between the wands locked and held, and something in the connection began to sound, not quite music, not quite anything he had a name for. He understood later that it was priori incantatem, that their wands shared a core from the same bird and had recognized each other. He did not understand this in the moment. In the moment, he understood only that he had to hold the connection and not let go. The echoes came, ghosts of spells, shades of people, figures pulling themselves from Voldemort's wand through the locked beam, translucent and unmistakable, assembling in the space between the two duellers. He saw the Hufflepuff champion first, still, settled, watching him with the specific expression of the recently dead, which is the expression of someone who has been freed from urgency. He said, "Hold on, Harry." He held on. He heard other voices, older, from farther down the line. He did not catalogue them. He gathered from their presence that he was not alone in this graveyard in whatever way mattered most, and he used that to hold on until the figures gathered enough density to obstruct the Death Eater's line of sight, and in that obstruction he found a moment, and he broke the connection, and he ran. He reached the Hufflepuff champion's body, and he took it because he was not going to leave it here. Because the Hufflepuff champion had said together, and that was still true, even now, even like this, and he summoned the cup with a spell Fleur had taught him in March, and the cup came to his hand, and he gripped it. The world inverted again. He arrived on the Hogwarts grounds, and the grass was the right grass, and the air was the right air, and the crowd was still there, still arranged in their stands, still lit by the warm, late June evening, and for 3 seconds there was a silence of the kind that comes before a crowd understands what it is seeing. Then the understanding arrived. He did not let go of the Hufflepuff champion's hand. Dumbledore was there faster than Harry could track, kneeling, assessing, his expression doing something Harry had never seen it do before. Something that was grief at its most controlled, grief that has decided to be useful. Other people were coming from the crowd. He could hear shouting. He could hear the quality of the noise that comes when a large gathering of people has realized that what they are looking at is not the conclusion they were prepared for. He did not see Fleur, but he could feel, in the specific way of someone who has learned to register the shape of rooms by the positions of people in them, that she was there, that she had understood from the moment he emerged from the maze, dragging something too heavy and too still to be a tournament trophy, what that weight was and what it meant. He could feel that she was not moving, that she was standing exactly where she had been standing, and watching and not moving, and that the stillness was the thing she had to offer, while the crowd moved everywhere around her. He was still sitting on the grass when someone, not Dumbledore, someone faster, someone operating on different priorities, pulled him away toward the castle. He went because there was nothing else to do yet. The Hufflepuff champion was still on the grass. He thought about the word together. The hospital wing was quiet in the way of places that have decided to be quiet around whatever is happening in them. Harry was in the second bed from the window. The Hogwarts matron had assessed him with the thoroughness of someone who has treated this exact kind of patient, the kind not badly injured by the body's accounting, but wrong in a way that accounting doesn't reach, and had administered what could be administered and drawn the curtain and told him to rest, in the tone that was less an instruction than a permission. He had not slept. He could hear the school existing outside the hospital wing windows, voices, movement, the quality of sound that comes when a large building full of people all learned something at the same time and is still determining what to do with it. Dumbledore had spoken to the assembled students. Harry had not been there for it. The Hogwarts matron had been very firm about that. But he had heard it through the window in pieces, the way you hear things when you're in a different room and paying attention despite yourself. Dumbledore had told them the Hufflepuff champion was murdered. Dumbledore had told them Voldemort had returned. He had not, as far as Harry could reconstruct from the pieces, softened either statement. This was consistent with what Harry knew of him. Fudge had been outside the castle. Harry had heard his voice somewhere in the chaos, saying this could not be confirmed, that the Ministry would need to investigate, that one should not make statements of this magnitude without proper verification. Harry had thought, staring at the curtain, that there was something almost useful about Fudge's denial. It gave you something specific and small to be contemptuous of when the larger thing was too large to look at directly. The Hufflepuff champion's parents were somewhere in the castle. Harry knew this the way he knew several things he could not directly observe, through the quality of the matron's movement when she passed his curtain, through the way the hospital wing felt occupied by something beyond what was in it. He had not been told this. He did not need to be. He could not have gone to them if he'd been told. He could not have looked at them yet, and remained functional. He was still thinking about the word together. The hospital wing door opened. He heard it, through the curtain, the sound of the latch, the specific quality of footsteps that suggested someone who had entered a room and already decided where they were going. Not the matron's footsteps, heavier and more deliberate. He heard the matron begin to say something. He heard the something stop. The curtain around his bed moved. Apolline Delacour sat in the chair beside his bed, with the ease of someone who has sat in chairs beside beds before, and knows that the manner in which you do it matters. Not carefully, which would signal that the person in the bed is fragile. Not casually, which would signal that you haven't noticed. But with the settled directness of someone who has arrived at where they intended to be. She did not speak immediately. She looked at him for a moment, in the specific way of someone taking an accurate reading, and he had the impression of being seen correctly, which was not a feeling he had often had. "You are not badly hurt," she said, finally. It was not a question. "No," Harry said. She nodded. She accepted this not as relief, but as one fact among several she was organizing. "What you are carrying," she said, "is heavier than what you came back with." She said this without any particular emphasis, as if it were simply an accurate description of something visible. "I know this." Harry looked at the curtain on the other side of the bed and said nothing. "Gabrielle," Apolline said, "has been drawing pictures of you for 3 months, since she came back from the lake." She paused. "I know this is not the right thing to tell you right now. I'm telling you anyway, because I find that telling people the right things at the wrong time is more useful than telling people the wrong things at the right time." Another pause. "She draws you with your glasses on and your hair very untidy, which is accurate, I see." Harry almost said something. He stopped, reorganized, tried again. Is Gabrielle all right?" "She is not here. She is in France, with my mother. She would have come, but she is 8 years old, and I decided she was not ready for a maze, and whatever comes after one." Apollina's expression moved briefly. "I am grateful that I did not bring her." Harry said, "I'm sorry I couldn't." He stopped. He had not done anything wrong. He had not failed to prevent what happened. The apology that wanted to come out of him was the kind that belongs to people who were present at terrible things, and are not sure if being present constitutes a kind of responsibility. Apolline looked at him for a moment. "You did not cause what happened tonight," she said. "You know this." "Yes," Harry said. "You are sorry anyway." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. "That is correct," she said. "Not as a judgment, but as an assessment. Being sorry for things you did not cause is appropriate when you witnessed them and when you cared about the person. You came back carrying him. You did not leave him." She looked at his hands, which were on the blanket, which he had not looked at since washing them. "That is not nothing." Fleur had come in at some point. Harry was not sure exactly when, because Apolline was the kind of person whose presence occupied the available attention of a room, and Fleur had arranged herself at the window with the competence of someone who understands that a scene is not theirs right now. She was looking out the window at the grounds, or at the reflection of the room in the darkened glass. Harry could see her from the corner of his eye. He had spent 4 months learning Fleur and her mother through letters and second-hand mention, and had constructed an idea of their relationship from those pieces. The idea was not wrong, but it was partial. What he saw now was the specific texture of a mother and daughter, very alike in the things that matter, and very different in how those things come out. Apolline direct, immediate, unguarded. Fleur present and concerned, and holding herself at the formal distance she used when the emotional content of a situation was not hers to manage. They were a family. Harry found this more reassuring than the claim or the ceremony or any of the mechanisms that had surrounded the past 4 months. He had been claimed by a family. He had thought this was a legal matter. He was revising this. Monsieur Delacour came in near the end of the evening, briefly, because he had been with Dumbledore, and Dumbledore did not finish quickly with things that mattered. He stood at the foot of the bed. He looked at Harry for a long moment, in the way he appeared to do most things, without hurry, without telegraphing. He said something in French. Fleur did not translate. Apolline and her husband exchanged a look of the kind that has history in it, and Monsieur Delacour nodded at Harry and left. Later, when the matron had returned, and Apolline had stepped out briefly, and Harry was alone with Fleur, he asked what her father had said. Fleur looked at the window. He said you looked younger than he expected. Harry thought about this. He thought about it for a while. He was not sure why a man who had never met him would say this, except that he thought it might be the most accurate thing anyone had said about him all year. "The ceremony," Apolline said, when she returned, and she said it with the quiet finality of someone closing a subject rather than a door. "It will not happen tonight. It will happen when the school is quieter, when the right people can be present, and when you have slept for at least one night." She looked at him. "I will decide when that is." Harry had not been asked. He found to his own surprise that he did not mind. Being decided about by someone who had already decided about him correctly, who knew about the pictures and the weight and the word sorry, was different from the ways he had been decided about before. He let his eyes close. He heard Apolline settle back in the chair. He heard Fleur move to the other side of the room. Outside, the school continued to exist and reckon with what had happened in it, and Harry was in the hospital wing being present at none of it, and for the first time in hours, this seemed like the correct place to be. Late that night, when the candles had mostly guttered, and the hospital wing had gone to the particular dark of a place that has decided it is finished with the day, Snape passed the door. The door was not quite closed. He did not push it open. Through the gap he could see the shape of the boy in the bed, the shape of a woman in the chair beside him who had not moved in several hours, the fainter shape at the window that was Fleur Delacour, asleep, sitting up. He stood outside the door for 3 seconds. Then he left. 3 days after the third task, the school had the particular quiet of a place that has been through something and is still deciding how to be afterward. Most students were packing. The Beaubaton contingent was leaving in 2 days. Harry had seen their carriage on the grounds that morning, the Abraxan horses restless in the June light. He had thought that 2 days from now that space would be empty again, and this was how most things ended. Not dramatically, but by departure. The ceremony was this afternoon. Apolline had found him in the corridor that morning and told him, 2 o'clock, Dumbledore's office. She had also said, as an aside, "You slept." It was not a question. He had, in fact, slept badly and uneasily, and the specific kind of tired that means functional, but not recovered. And he could tell she had decided this was enough. He was in Dumbledore's office at 2. The space had been arranged for purpose. Chairs moved, desk shifted, room opened, the silver instruments clicked. The Phoenix watched from his perch. Apolline and Monsieur Delacour stood near the window. Fleur stood to one side in the precise posture she used when the emotion underneath was not something she had found a way to manage yet. Maximum was near the door, angled slightly away, present as witness. Then Apolline brought in Gabrielle. He had been thinking about this, about what it would mean to see the person whose hand in the water had started all of this, awake on land. Gabrielle Delacour walked in, looked around the room once, located Harry specifically, and came directly to him. She was smaller than he remembered, which was a function of the lake distorting everything. She was 8 years old, silver blonde, with the self-possessed quality of a child who has been around adults her whole life and not found them especially intimidating. She stopped in front of him and looked up. "I know what you look like now," she said, in French accented English, with the seriousness of someone reporting an important finding. "You were blurry before." Harry looked at her. He had absolutely no idea what to say to this. "You were unconscious," he managed. "You weren't supposed to look like anything." "I was not completely unconscious," she said, with great dignity. "I remember the water. And your face, but blurry. Now it is not blurry." She reached up and took his hand, then looked at his forehead. "You have a scar. Does it hurt?" "Sometimes." She nodded, as if this were the correct answer, and kept his hand and turned to face the room, ready to proceed. Harry stood there holding the hand of a child who had decided he was the kind of person whose hand should be held, and thought, this was what it was for. Apolline addressed the room, Dumbledore, Maxime, and explained the ceremony in brief, though most people present already understood it. The life debt, formed the moment Harry made his choice in the lake, was being discharged today through formal acknowledgement. The Delacour family was recognizing Harry as kin, by deed, not blood. The distinction mattered, and the words were specific. Then she took a letter from inside her robes and unfolded it. She said something in French that Harry understood to be a form of address, an opening. Then she read. He could not understand the words, but when she read them, the room shifted, not dramatically, no visible sign, but the quality of the air changed the way it changes when a window opens, and the air outside recognizes the air within. The phoenix opened his wings and closed them. Gabrielle's hand tightened slightly on Harry's. Fleur was looking at the window. Her jaw was set. Apolline finished. The room returned to itself, or perhaps to a slightly altered version of itself, one that had been shifted a degree and had decided to accept the new position. She folded the letter and looked at Harry. "My mother's blessing is given," she said, in English now. "In the oral record of our family, your name is now spoken after your deed, which will be told as follows, that you chose to bring a Delacour child out of the dark water when no obligation required it, because you had decided she was worth the cost." Harry was very still. "The acknowledgement," she continued, "requires one final thing." She looked at Gabrielle, who reached into the small bag she was carrying and produced something small and silver. She held it up to Harry with both hands, formally. It was a button. Silver, not especially large, with a pattern on it, a stylized bird or flame or something between the two, the same mark Harry had seen on the ICW seal and on Apolline's wax. A family mark. "It is from my grandmother's coat," Gabrielle said. "She said to give it to you. She said it is old and it is enough." Harry took it. It was warm. He closed his hand around it. Apolline spoke the words of acknowledgement, formally in French, then briefly in English. "Kin of the Delacour line, by deed not blood, recognized and witnessed here." Dumbledore said, "Witnessed." Nothing dramatic happened. It was simply done. Afterward, the room rearranged itself, as rooms do when a formal thing concludes, and people are deciding which direction to move. Gabrielle, still holding Harry's hand, looked up at him. "Do you like France?" "I've never been," Harry said. She looked at him as if this had an obvious solution. "You should come. We have the sea. Maman says you can." "I know," she mentioned the sea. Gabrielle appeared satisfied. "I have drawn many pictures of you," she said. "You can have them when you come. So you will know what you look like when I draw you." Harry thought about being the subject of someone's pictures for 3 months before they'd met you. About being someone's idea of a person before you were actually a person to them. He thought about the button in his closed hand. "I'd like that," he said. Dumbledore appeared beside Harry as the others moved toward the door, Apolline speaking quietly to Monsieur Delacour, Gabrielle still carrying her bag with the careful pride of someone who has completed an important task, Maxime saying something to Fleur that Fleur was listening to with her hands still. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. Then, "I am glad someone thought to do that." Harry was not certain what he meant, the rescue or the recognition. He thought Dumbledore had intended it to be both. "So am I," he said. Outside, the afternoon was still and warm. Fleur found Harry on the grounds, or he found her, neither entirely certain who had initiated the direction. The Beauxbatons carriage was visible across the grass, already carrying the quality of something about to be somewhere else. "2 days," Fleur said. "I know." She looked at the carriage. "I am not good at goodbyes, but I have practice. I have always known I would eventually live somewhere my family didn't." She said this without self-pity, as a settled fact. "It is not the same as being good at them." Harry said, "I don't have much practice. No one's ever left me through a choice." She looked at him sideways. He had meant it as a neutral observation about logistics, and it had come out true in a way he hadn't planned. He decided not to clarify. She had heard the accurate thing and was deciding what to do with it. They walked without talking for a while, the carriage large ahead of them, 2 days away. The button was in his pocket. He could feel its small, specific weight, and he thought about what it meant to carry something that had a name for what you were. He did not have the word yet. He thought he might, eventually. The morning the Beauxbatons carriage left, Harry was on the front steps of the castle before breakfast. He had said goodbye to Apolline and Monsieur Delacour earlier, in the entrance hall, in the particular light of an early morning that has not yet decided what kind of day it will be. Apolline had taken his face in her hands for a moment. He had not been prepared for this. He did not know the last time someone had held his face as if its precise dimensions mattered to them, and the answer, when he looked for it, was that he did not have one. His Aunt Petunia had never held anything about him in that particular way, or in any way that resembled it. Apolline held his face and looked at him directly for 2 seconds, and then released him and said, "You will write." Not a request. He said yes. He meant it. Monsieur Delacour shook his hand, in the way of a man who communicates through handshakes and has put something specific into this one. Harry could not have said what it was, but he felt it, the way you feel the content of things people are deliberate about. Then they had gone to the carriage to oversee the final packing, and he had gone to the steps. And here he was. The Abraxan horses were harnessed and restless. The Beauxbatons students boarded. Other students from Hogwarts exchanged addresses and promises with the optimism of people who believe they will maintain international correspondence. Maxime was the last of the chaperones to board, and she looked at Harry once across the grounds. Not warm, not cold, but the expression of someone who has watched something from the beginning and formed a settled opinion, and then went up the steps. Fleur was still on the grounds. She stood a few feet from the carriage steps, not moving toward them yet, looking at the castle. Her silver blonde hair was loose. She had worn it pulled back for most of the school year, the precise manner of someone who treats their appearance as a matter of professionalism, and the loose hair meant something different, though Harry couldn't have said precisely what. She turned when he came down the steps and walked toward her. They stood on the grounds and said nothing for a moment, which was a thing they had gotten reasonably good at over the past 4 months. The morning light was still cool. Above the forbidden forest, there were clouds that had not yet decided whether to become weather. "Gringotts London," Fleur said, not particularly to Harry, but in the way of someone testing a decision aloud. "In the autumn. My English needs to be better, and they have offered a placement. It will be strange, to live somewhere my family doesn't know where everything is." "You'll figure out where everything is," Harry said. "Yes." She was quiet. "I'm not going because of the kin claim. The placement was arranged in February, but the kin claim gives it a different. It adds a reason that was not the original reason." A pause. "That something can be true for one reason, and then additionally true for another." "I think that's just how things go," Harry said. She looked at him with the expression that meant she was deciding whether to accept this. Then she turned back toward the carriage. "I will write," she said. "To you and through my mother. Gabrielle will write also. She has already asked my mother for your address." "I know. Apolline mentioned it." Fleur made a sound that was almost a laugh and not quite one. "She is 8 years old, and she has decided you are significant," she said. "There is very little that can be done about that once she has decided." Harry said, "I don't mind." Fleur looked at him for one more moment. Then she said something in French that she did not translate, and he did not ask her to. He was fairly sure he understood the shape of it, even without the words. The specific tonal quality of a thing that is meant sincerely, and that the person saying it has decided they will say in their first language, because saying it in a second one would lose something. He nodded. She turned and went up the carriage steps, and the door closed, and a few minutes later the enormous horses stretched their wings, and the carriage lifted from the grounds and diminished slowly above the tree line until it was gone. He stood on the grounds and watched until there was nothing left to watch. That evening, the Gryffindor common room was almost empty. Most of the fourth years were elsewhere, at dinner, in the library, in the specific aimless way of people who are almost, but not quite, done with a school year, and have run out of things to do with the remaining time. Ron was sitting in one of the armchairs by the fire. Harry sat across from him. Ron looked at the fire for a while. Then he said, with the unusual directness he sometimes produced when he'd been thinking something for long enough, "I didn't say the right things about Fleur, about all of it." Harry waited. "I was jealous," Ron said. "Not of her." He looked at his hands. "Of them wanting you?" A pause. "Obviously I want you too. You're my best friend." Another pause. "That came out wrong." "It didn't," Harry said. Ron exhaled. He looked at the fire. "You've been wanted by a lot of people this year," he said. "And I know that's complicated for you. And I don't want to. I'm not asking you to manage how I feel about it. I just wanted you to know what it actually was. Because I think you thought it was about Fleur." "I thought it might be about Fleur," Harry said, "or about me spending evenings somewhere that wasn't here." "That too," Ron said, honestly. "But mostly the other thing." He looked up. Is it good? The kin claim? Now that it's done. Is it what you thought it would be?" Harry thought about this seriously, the way Ron's questions sometimes required. "I don't know what I thought it would be," he said. "But I think it's good. In a way I don't entirely have the words for yet." Ron nodded, with the expression of someone who has received an answer that is not fully formed and has decided it is enough. "Good," he said, and picked up the Quidditch magazine he had apparently been not reading. Harry picked up his book. They sat in comfortable silence, which was, Harry thought, its own kind of answer to the question. Dumbledore called him to the office the following morning. What he got was shorter than he expected, and more useful. "The practical implications are these," Dumbledore said, with the precision of someone who has decided precision here is a kindness. "The Delacours may correspond with you freely. Invitations may come. None of this conflicts with the blood protection at Privet Drive, which remains what it is regardless of what else is true. You are not being extracted from that arrangement." A pause. "You are being given something you can hold in addition to what you already hold." Harry thought about this on the walk back. He had lived for most of his life, holding what he had with both hands, because nothing additional had ever come. Now there was something else to hold, and both hands were still available. He tucked the button from his pocket back in again and kept walking. He thought briefly about Bill Weasley, Ron's oldest brother, 23 or 24, working in Egypt right now, who did not know that the French witch he would eventually come to love had a family that had just formally claimed the boy who was his youngest brother's best friend. Harry did not know the specific shape of that future, only that it existed, and that the two families he was now connected to would eventually overlap in ways none of them had yet anticipated. He found this strange and not unwelcome. Ginny found him in the corridor near the common room late that afternoon. She walked alongside him for a few steps before she said anything. "You seem different," she said. She was 13, and she said things directly, the way she did. "Different how?" She considered. "You seem like someone who has a second address." She said it with the matter-of-fact quality of a person who has found the accurate phrase and doesn't need to embellish it. Harry thought about that. He thought it was probably the most precise thing anyone had said about him all week. "I think I do," he said. Neville fell into step on his other side a few moments later, as if he had been heading the same direction anyway. "Do you think you'll go to France?" he asked. "I don't know," Harry said. "Maybe." Neville nodded in his thoughtful way. "I think you will," he said. Not as a prediction, exactly, more as an observation about the kind of person Harry was. The kind, Neville appeared to believe, who follows through on things. Harry was not sure this was accurate. He thought he might try to make it accurate, though. That seemed like the kind of thing the year had left him with. The Hogwarts Express left the station at 11 o'clock, which was the same time it always left, which was one of those facts that remained true regardless of what the year around it had done. Harry was in the same compartment as always. Ron, Hermione, Ginny, Neville, the same seats, the same light through the same windows. The year was ending in the way that years which have contained a death always end, unevenly, with pockets of ordinary life that interrupted without warning and were interrupted in return. Ron had a Quidditch magazine. Hermione had a book she was not reading. Ginny was asleep against the window. Neville was quietly content with the fact of being in transit. Harry had 2 letters in his pocket that he had not opened. They had arrived 3 days ago, both from Apolline, both with the familiar silver wax and the precise leftward slant of her handwriting. He had not opened them at Hogwarts. He had been waiting for the train, which was not a decision he had made consciously, but which felt correct on examination. Something about the movement, about being between places, made it seem like the right time to read the letters that were also about being between one version of things and another. He opened the first one now. It was ordinary, which was the word he kept arriving at when he tried to describe what Apolline's letters were. Not ordinary, as in unimportant. Ordinary, as in the specific quality of correspondence from someone who has decided to know you and is going about it the way you go about knowing anyone. by asking questions. She asked what subjects he preferred. She asked whether he liked the sea. She asked, in a sentence that she appeared to have inserted without particular ceremony, whether he knew how to swim. He looked at this last question. After the lake, it landed differently than it would have before. He thought yes was the correct answer, with the caveat that he had learned in a way most people didn't. He thought Apolline had also thought about the lake when she wrote it, that the question was a way of asking how he was without asking directly. The second letter mentioned Gabrielle. Apolline wrote, "My daughter has asked, several times now, whether she can write to you directly. I have told her that this is something you would have to agree to. She has received this information with great patience, which I tell you only so you understand how seriously she is taking the question. Her spelling in French is not reliable, but her enthusiasm makes up for it." Harry laughed, once, quietly. It surprised him enough that he put his hand over his mouth immediately, and Ron looked up from his magazine. "What?" Ron said. "Nothing," Harry said. "One of the letters." Ron looked up, read the expression, the small one, the almost laugh, and looked like he was going to say something. He decided not to. He went back to his magazine. Hermione did not look up from her book, but the corner of her mouth moved briefly. King's Cross arrived at 5 o'clock. Harry collected his things and followed the current toward the barrier, and threw it into the organized chaos of platform 9 3/4 emptying, families finding each other, trunks and owls, the particular noise of 9 months of school arriving at its conclusion. Ron's parents were there, as they always were. Ron's mother pulled him into an embrace that Ron, this year, did not immediately extract himself from. The easy warmth of it was something Harry had watched for 4 years. The warmth of a family that had always treated him as an extension of Ron, and had never needed a formal mechanism to do it. Ron's mother told Harry she was glad he was safe, which covered more ground than it might have in a year, without a graveyard in it. Harry stood slightly to one side, while the family found its arrangement, which was what he always did, and which had always been fine, and which was still fine now, only with the additional information, this year, that standing to one side was a position, and not a definition. He saw the Dursleys across the platform. They were exactly as they always were, which was a fact about them as reliable as the train's departure time. Aunt Petunia was thin and watchful, her neck at its usual angle, scanning the crowd with the expression of someone who expects to find something embarrassing and is prepared for it. Uncle Vernon was large and purple-faced, in the way of someone to whom the scale and inconvenience of the world is a personal affront. Dudley was Dudley, large and bored, and already looking at his watch. Harry had spent 14 years reading the particular shape of their indifference and knowing every contour of it. He was not surprised by them. He was, he found, and this was new, this specific modulation, only slightly sad. Not wounded. Not in the old way that had always sat beneath the surface of going back. Slightly, specifically, cleanly soured. The way you can be sad about something when you have enough room around it to have a view. Then he saw Apolline. She was standing slightly apart from the crowd, nearer the barrier than anyone who had come through it recently, in the particular way of someone who arrived early and found their spot, and has been waiting there with complete equanimity. She was more formally dressed than she had been at Hogwarts. She looked, among the crowd of ordinary people, like someone the crowd had decided to give space to, which they were doing in the ambient way crowds do these things without discussing it. Silver blonde hair. A kind of stillness that was the opposite of the stillness of someone waiting nervously. She moved toward the Dursleys. Harry watched this happen from across the platform, with the feeling of someone observing an event that is real and that they could not have predicted. Apolline introduced herself. She shook Petunia's hand. Petunia's face went through several expressions that Harry recognized. Startlement, the rapid recalibration that always happened when someone who did not fit her categories appeared in front of her. The frozen smile that meant she had decided on a social response and was executing it without being entirely sure what was happening. Apolline said something. Harry was too far away to hear it precisely, but the shape of it, the careful grammatical precision of her English, the specific register she used when she was being formal as a deliberate act of respect, came through the noise of the platform clearly enough that he could reconstruct it. She hoped they would take good care of her family's ward over the summer. She looked forward to corresponding with Harry regularly. Her daughter sent her regards. Petunia did not know what to do with this. Vernon did not either. Dudley appeared to not be paying attention. Apolline looked across the platform at Harry, and for one moment the noise of King's Cross existed around them, and not between them. She nodded, once. Not a goodbye, or not only a goodbye, but the nod of someone who has done what they came to do and found it sufficient. Then she turned and moved back through the crowd toward the barrier, and was gone. He got into the car with the Dursleys. He put his trunk in the boot, which required the usual negotiation about space, which he lost in the usual ways. He got into the back seat. Dudley sat beside him without acknowledgement. The platform was visible through the window as the car pulled away. The crowd thinning, families sorting themselves toward exits. A flash of silver blonde near the barrier. Not Apolline. Someone else. A stranger with similar coloring. Not her at all. He looked anyway until it was out of sight. He had Apollaine's letters in his jacket pocket. He had the Delacour family's address on paper, specific and real, in the same pocket. He had the button from an old woman's coat in his trouser pocket, small and silver and warm. He was still going to Privet Drive. He was still 14 years old. And 14 years old was the age he had been, for a very long time, without anyone outside the walls of Hogwarts deciding that the fact of him mattered specifically to them. This year, someone had decided. The car moved south through London traffic, and Harry looked out the window and thought about writing back to Gabrielle, whose spelling in French was unreliable, but whose enthusiasm made up for it, and about the sea, which he had never seen, and about all the things he was now carrying that he had not been carrying in September, which were not heavier than the things he had always carried, only different in kind, and in the fact that they were, for one,